And Byron Lotter from Vestact joins us now. And again, I feel like David and I are missing out on something in the world. Byron's just back from the Kruger, I think on some annual boys walk with the lions. What on earth are you doing in the Kruger walking with the lions?
Oh, it's great fun. We didn't walk into any lions this time. We walked into a herd of 600 buffalo, which was pretty incredible. You'll enjoy our name. There's 8 boys. We do it every year. We're called Jocks of the Bushveld. So.
All right. Lots of hearty joking and no girls present to spoil fun and everything. No. He's a value investor. So you don't actually do much work, do you? You come back every 3 months, check the shares, and then go off again.
Not a value investor, long-term investor.
Right.
So you don't pull us with the value investors who are sucking wind with Anglo at the moment.
Ah, okay.
We're just patient, you know. We spend our time reading. I took annual reports and sat in the Kruger and read them.
That's what I mean.
Days,
you read things once a year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you've got to know what you're talking about, and you've got to follow these companies. But it was quite nice to get out of Signal for a few days and come back and see.
You had a visa. This is what we call a boys' weekend away. It's called a visa.
Yes.
We need tighter regulations. Immigration needs to
get
do
the
its
competition
work.
commission to get involved.
I think my fiance was more excited that I was going. You know,
you know there's problems when the question is, don't you want to be with me when you're enjoying yourself?
Shame. She's probably watching this show is suddenly all about me. So let's move to the markets.
So talking of signals, let's go to MTN and Vodacom.
Absolutely. So earlier this week, we spoke to the CEO of MTN, that's Mteto Nyati. And one of the things that David and I wanted to put on the table right from the onset, well, are you the new golden boy? 48 hours into the job, you come and you give the unions what you want. What were the implications of those decisions? And this is what Mteto had to say.
What has happened in the process, what both parties have understood is that from our side, we felt that this is impacting negatively in terms of our customers. So we wanted to make sure that we close this thing. But on their side, it was hammering, it was hitting very hard in terms of their members. So when I came in at the right time where both parties wanted a resolution, but people were not talking.
Well, Byron, I don't know if you caught up with that at all while you were with the Buffalo, but he said, we put it to him that he'd just given in. There was the strike and there were these bonus issues and so on, and he just seemed to grant it. And he said, no, it was the amount that they had before. He said the problem was they weren't talking to each other. The sides, the management and the union weren't talking to each other. And it sounded like it needed someone to come in and get things going again in terms of communication, which doesn't sound good.
Yeah, there seemed to be a lack of communication, as you said. But it's a lot easier for a business like MTN to meet in the middle because they're printing cash and they're making a lot of money and things are going well, as opposed to the mining groups who are facing weaker commodity prices, increasing costs. I think, you know, in terms of stock price-wise, the MTN share barely noticed that there was a strike on. And my colleague Sasha had to do an upgrade and got everything done pretty smoothly. And he said he barely noticed there was even a strike. I think the biggest news for MTN at the moment is the sanctions in Iran and the fact that they can possibly bring back $1.1 billion worth of cash out of Iran and into, you know, into other countries where they can reinvest, like South Africa.
So the other competitor, of course, that had news out in the market this week was Vodacom. And just a quick look at their numbers, we saw an uptick in terms of their subscriber growth and the likes. But again, for me, my attention is always drawn back to this Neotel deal and the kind of investment that the Competition Commission says they need to be putting into the ground before they go ahead. Given that and the Iran play with MTN, standing shoulder to shoulder, who would you go for and why?
So you're asking me Vodacom or MTN?
Yeah.
We prefer MTN. I do like Vodacom, but we prefer MTN just because they've got more scope for growth. You know, Vodacom's main market is obviously South Africa, which is coming off of much higher base. You know, some of the countries that MTN are operating in don't even have 3G yet. I mean, imagine still operating on edge. It's almost impossible with an iPhone these days. So the opportunity there is still huge. But of course, that comes with the risks because, you know, MTN operating in Iran, in Nigeria, when the oil prices go down, it impacts MTN. So there's lots of moving parts. But I think both of them are solid investments and probably two of the only really solid dividend plays left. You know, Kumba's gone, and ones that you can rely on because you'd imagine that we're going to see solid growth going forward. ARPUs in Africa are so low compared to the developed world. So yes, you might see a bit of shift from voice to messaging, but I think we're going to see a bottom out. We're going to start seeing ARPUs picking up as consumers in Africa start becoming wealthier and spend more money on communication and use their smartphones more.
Well, we had fascinating news of corporate activity in the week. Always interesting to see that with Curro and Advtech. And Frank Thompson, the acting CEO of Advtech, you'll remember that he was the CEO. He retired, and then Leslie Marsdorp was the chairman and came back to be CEO. It was a bit complicated, and then he left quickly, disagreement on strategy, etc. So Frank's back, and now having to deal with this, what seems to be turning into a hostile deal, proposed deal from Curro, these two. They're the two big listed players in the education sector, but there are a lot of other private players. Let's see what Frank Thompson had to say.
I can't give you a lot of detail, and I think it's important just to go back to what's in fact happened today, which is that the board has applied its mind very carefully. As we've said in our announcements, we engaged extensively on the matter and thought about it carefully. And in the final analysis, the board, which, as you will know well, has a fiduciary duty to the company, in light of that, has decided not to continue with the discussions.
Well, and we know what's happened since. So the discussions have continued, cash has been put on the table, and it seems to be a bit of a hostile interaction now. Where do you see this playing out? What do you think is the logical conclusion of this process?
Well, we've seen similar situations with the likes of Bidvest and Adcock. And I think, the shareholders at the end of the day will decide. And apparently, the likes of Coronation and Old Mutual have already given in to
Kagiso Asset Management, between them 35%, those two.
Exactly. And they're the ones who are going to decide, whether, they're going to sell their shares or not. Obviously, Curro's sort of bargaining point is that Advtech, when they bought Maravest, said that 8 Rand was fair value, and now they're offering 13 Rand. And obviously, a selling price and a buying price is different.
Absolutely.
But a spread of 5 Rand, or percentage-wise 50–60%, you almost back Curro in what they're saying about that. But of course, also you've got Advtech shareholders who are sitting on quite a valuable company, and the PEs aren't too high. Now they must take Curro shares instead, which are heavily inflated, and they might not feel comfortable with that. But obviously, if you put Advtech into that Curro business, it's going to be very earnings enhancing. So I think it's great. I think having one big education business like that, and I'm sure there's still so much scope for other businesses to start and possibly list and come and compete, because the blue sky is huge.
Now, one of the things you were saying during the week is that together they only make up about 10% of the private education market.
They put 11, and he sort of did a mental thing, and he didn't say I was wrong. Maybe it's a bit more than that, but it's still very small in terms of, as you say, the blue sky available.
11% of the private school market, maybe.
Correct.
But private schools only 4% of the whole education sector in South Africa. So there's still huge potential to start, creating schools from scratch.
But we talked about the 11% from a competition point of view. One thinks that they're the two big players because they're the listed ones, but there are lots of other players, lots of other private schools in the country. What interests me, Byron, is the business model here. Because if you have two retailers or two manufacturers of plastic chips or something, and you put them together, you say, hey, we've got synergies now, we're going to have a common back office, we're going to reduce distribution costs. Famous Brands has Fisherways and Steers, and you see the two of them next to each other. Of course, they've saved a lot of costs at the back. Schools can't do that. You can't say, okay, we've combined, so we're going to close that school and retrench teachers. Their business model depends on constant, rapid growth of more schools, more pupils, more teachers.
Yeah, it's obviously a sensitive subject. You can't have them operating ruthlessly and closing schools and opening schools as they see fit, because there's people's lives at stake, and education is extremely important within the country. But I think having a big operator like Curro Advtech together is good for South Africa as a whole, because I know I've been to a few Curro results presentations, and Chris van der Merwe is very passionate about providing education where there's a huge gap in South Africa, where the public sector has sort of failed, and we've seen it with the hospital groups, we've seen it with Connection, with the likes of Telkom.
The state schools that are good are expensive.
Yeah, exactly. And the private schools are almost out of range, and the waiting lists are so long. So there is definitely room for a big operator to come in like that. And it will give Curro more scope as well to create the sort of big big end, bottom end type schools, the affordable private school care, because most of their profits come from the Curro brand, the top end stuff, but they do have the Meridian where they have 3,000 or 4,000 students. If they could create massive schools like that where parents are paying 4,000 or 5,000 rand a year to get a decent private school education for their kids, that would be fantastic.
So another offer to buy that was in the corporate headlines this week was Steinhoff offering 1.34 billion rand, I think it was, for Illiad. A quick glance at that proposition, does that make sense? Do you think this is a fair price? Do you think this could possibly go through?
I think so. I mean, the board seems to be backing it, and Illiad have done well in a sector that's done well. I mean, look at what Cashbuild have done. Their share price has doubled in the space of a year, and their growth, sales growth of 15-20%. So we've seen the sector booming. Builders Warehouse has been doing well, even amongst SPAR. When you look deeper down, the building supplier side has done well. And Steinhoff, these guys can't keep still. It's very small in the bigger scheme of things for them, but it certainly fits nicely into their Steinbuild brand. They've got the synergies, they've got the DCs, and Illiad have some decent brands that they can work off. So it's small in the bigger scheme of things, but they won't leave any stones unturned.
There was a question asked about when the deal was announced. It wasn't a deal where there'd been lots of rumours in the market. It just happened almost as a done deal.
Although Illiad were under cautionary for quite a while.
They were, but no one knew what.
Yeah.
And when it was announced, the share price didn't move. And I think it was Bruce Whitfield pointed out the other night that it had moved, I think in the last 3 months, up 30%.
Yeah.
So who knew what?
Yeah, this always happens in the market, unfortunately.
Do we do enough about finding out about it?
We should, actually, because it's obviously a bit unfair.
Who bought the shares?
But it's so hard to keep these things secret. You've got the corporate, the bankers doing the deals. You've got the insiders at the company. Someone tells his wife, who tells her friend at the hairdresser, and somehow these things get out.
And the other guy tells the other guy at the Kruger Park while they're talking to Buffalo. And
he's being very sexist. He's saying that wives go to hairdressers. I also go to the hairdresser.
And you get a 1.5.
He doesn't take long.
You can do your own hair, David. Come on.
Well, I can't see the back.
Guys, let's move on to steel. So early in the week, we were talking about Evraz, and they're saying that they're looking at the production glut in the market, and they're thinking of holding back. And we made the comment that perhaps we should be looking at ArcelorMittal as an indicator of seeing how this these steel dynamics are actually going to be playing out on listed companies. And then they come out and they say the fall in profits has been 14 times wider than the last reading. And they too are also going to be considering closing down a plant. It certainly seems like the steel producers are in for a really rough ride.
Yeah, I think it's almost an industry that we might not see in South Africa within 5 years, and we're just going to be importing steel because the conditions are too tough. The capacity from the likes of China is just too high, so there's endless supply. I mean, they're lobbying for things like South African construction companies having to buy steel from them only. Now, the construction companies have margins of like 3%. Imagine now they have to buy inflated steel. It's just not fair. It's a sector that's I would completely avoid as an investment.
Quick one on Anglo-American. There was a time when Anglo-American, if their results came out, you'd put it top of the show and you'd probably spend the whole time talking about it. We're coming to it last. There's less of it than there was, and things like Kumba and Platinum, both on hard times. Is this a time to buy Anglo-American?
No, we're avoiding commodities altogether. I think, you look at a production report that Bulletin had a few days ago, and you can see that they're still pumping out iron ore, they're still pumping out oil. And I think these companies had geared themselves up so heavily for the China infrastructure boom that now that the demand's slowed down, there's still so much supply in the market, and I don't think that's going to end. It's going to be a supply war, production war, almost, for these companies to try to stay in profit. So, I mean, Mark Kutafani's doing his best, and I heard him on the radio when I was driving here, and he said, listen, the Minas Rio purchase was terrible timing, but if we sold now, it would be even worse. We've got to push that now. We're hopefully reaching the bottom. But I think the bottom is going to be a long, hard road. And I think as an investors with choices, avoid.
Well, Harry Oppenheimer of Anglo-American said business is easy except for one thing, the timing.
Yeah.
So thanks to Byron Lotter. Welcome back from the Kruger Park. And he is from Vestact.